For the lion's share of the last 3 weeks, the hopes and prayers of the world remained focused upon a soccer team trapped in a cave in the mountains of northern Thailand, not in an idle way, but in an earnest way. Imagine the millions of ongoing whispered prayers from around the globe in every language, a steady, fervent roar lifted heavenward. The search and rescue operation carried us through every emotion, from the deep concern when the news first broke that the boys were missing, to waning hope as day dragged into dispiriting day, to elation upon their discovery, to the full recognition of the magnitude of their plight as even a professional diver lost his life in the extreme conditions, to the earnest planning, breathless waiting, and the slow unfolding of a wonder of professionalism and prayer and providence. 4 safely out, then 8 safely out, then all boys and their coach safely out, then the rescue team out, and the operation concluded. And we can begin to name folks who are truly and obviously heroes. The soccer coach who kept the boys safe, calm, and cared for over 9 dark days of not knowing whether help would arrive in time or not, sacrificing his meal rations so that the frailest boys might have enough calories, and teaching the boys meditative practices to calm their anxieties. The diver who discovered the team and brought news that they were, however improbably, alive. The Australian diving doctor who stayed with the boys from the moment of their discovery and tended to their health and nutrition. The Thai Navy SEAL who gave his own life delivering life-giving oxygen to the boys. The rescue divers who even after that went back again and again and again. But the list doesn't stop there. Those are only the most obvious. I invite you to think more deeply about the other lives that touched and surrounded, protected, preserved, and cherished these boys' lives. It begins with people who never stopped hoping for them. Strangers who from the moment they went missing trekked through mountainous jungle from dawn to dusk, day after day, looking for cracks and crevices, fissures, and alternate entrances to the caves. Think of the drivers delivering the oxygen tanks, or the army of volunteers offering food and comfort to workers and families, or the pump operators fighting continuously to pump out even a couple of centimeters of water depth. Think of the volunteers damming streams to reduce the water flow to the cave, the farmers into whose flooded fields the water was pumped. Think of the saffron-clad monks praying for hours upon end as if life depended upon their prayers. And perhaps it did. I could go on. Volunteer school children rehearsing with divers in swimming pools to get the techniques in order before the real rescue operation began. Ambulance drivers, helicopter pilots, medical staff. The boys in that cave may have felt deeply alone in their plight, but they were never alone. They were perhaps the opposite of alone. Now, the cave rescue is a dramatic example. So dramatic, in fact, that it might eclipse what should be an obvious truth. Each human life, in its own way, is similarly surrounded and supported, not with rescue divers and pump operators and helicopter pilots perhaps, but each life is surrounded and sustained and supported by dozens of other lives. Each life has other lives that went before to prepare the way. Each life has encouragers, helpers, playmates, helpmates, soulmates, exemplars, and mentors. The author of the book of Hebrews calls the attention of the faith community to a beautifully poetic image, a great cloud of witnesses. Now, to set the scene just a bit, the book of Hebrews was written late in the first century, perhaps by Paul, as tradition has long suggested, but more likely by an unknown author, someone highly educated in logic and rhetoric. It was originally untitled. I didn't know this. but a scribal conjecture written on the earliest manuscript to Hebrews became the title of the epistle. The letter is written to a group of early Christians and also to a church in crisis. Amid persecution and backsliding and the challenges facing the early church, members of the faith community had begun steadily to fall away. The letter therefore takes the form of simultaneous admonishment and encouragement, using language like, "Lift your drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees and make straight paths for your feet." In the passage we read for this morning, the author is urging the hearers, the members of the faith community, not to view their lives in isolation, but to take inventory of all of those who have gone before them as forebears, as examples, as mentors, as instructors in faith and perseverance. The argument is a lengthy one, beginning before we took up the account, as the author calls the hearers' attention to the faith of Abraham and Sarah, Isaac, Jacob and Esau, and Joseph, their earliest faith ancestors. The discussion jumps forward to the faith of Moses' parents, and then of Moses and of the Hebrew people in the wilderness. The unlikely faith and courage of the prostitute Rahab bears specific mention, as well as that of judges and kings and prophets, Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, and Samuel. And then the author moves artfully from known and named heroes to the general, the nameless folk who were persecuted for their faith, died for it, wandered in deserts and mountains and caves and holes in the ground, all for your benefit, the author writes. You're not alone. Your faith is not an accident. Indeed, you stand upon the shoulders of giants. You are surrounded by those who have carried your faith both for you and to you, and your faith should be precious to you, so do not lose hope. Like the boys in the cave, whose lives depended upon the sacrifices, the prayers, and the earnest labors of untold thousands of people, so also the faith lives of the audience of the letter to the Hebrews, including us, by the way, are the product of the love, the labors, the earnest endeavors, and the sacrifices of many. A cloud of witnesses. I love that image. Once, while backpacking on an Appalachian mountain ridgetop, I had the experience of walking in the middle of a cloud, surrounded by it, enfolded by it, cooled by it, the vapor of it filling my lungs with each breath. I was so completely surrounded by it as to be nearly a part of the cloud. And that's the image that the author brings to my mind with this cloud of witnesses. So now I move to my larger point. For the month of July, I'm focusing my preaching and our worship upon gratitude as a spiritual discipline, inviting us to take time to reflect upon the things that we may daily take for granted. For this week, I want to ask each of us to think about our cloud of witnesses, our cloud of helpers, the people who have prayed for us, searched for us in our lost places, wept with us, taught us, encouraged us, those whose influences have touched and surrounded us and filled our lungs, so to speak. And I invite a little deeper reflection. Just as the heroes in the cave rescue began with the obvious, the divers, the doctors, but move outward to unsung heroes like food preparers and jungle searchers and oxygen tank fillers. And just as the cloud of witnesses in Hebrews began with Abraham and Moses, but moves outward to others far too numerous to mention, so our cloud, or at least my cloud, is filled with people who have been heroes to me, though they might not even have known it. I could begin with the obvious. My grandmothers and my parents, of course, my wife Amy, who has endured much and taught me much. But also Gilmer Whicker, my old scoutmaster. He owned and operated a heating oil company, but more than that, he was a hero to hundreds of boys. Gilmer was 64 years old, had heart and breathing concerns. He had to use a special salt substitute on his food. But once a month, he packed up his gear, left his wife at home, and took a bunch of 12 and 13-year-old boys out into the woods, rain or shine. He didn't have a child in the troop, but he took a week of his vacation every summer to take us to scout camp. He slept on the ground in a sleeping bag with 64-year-old muscles and bones and taught us how to light fires with wet wood, how to read a map, and to use a compass. And he did it purely out of love. Gilmer Wicker died 41 years ago when I was 13. But he's in my cloud. Hattie Camp was a teacher at my middle school. She wasn't my teacher. She taught a class down the hall. But maybe she could just spot a kid who at the time was a little discouraged and down on himself. She called me into her classroom one day as I walked by, and she said, "Boy, you're a full wagon. You're going places." And that encouragement was like oxygen. I walked out of her room 2 inches taller. It was just one day, just one sentence. I wrote Mrs. Camp a note when I graduated high school, and it said, "You may not remember me, but thank you." And she sent back a card with a $5 bill tucked inside for a student that she never taught, at least not in class. She's in my cloud. My oldest and dearest friend, John McCarthy, gone too sadly and too soon, is often in my thoughts. Sometimes he carried me, and sometimes I carried him, I guess. He's in my cloud. My seminary professors, Catherine Gonzalez, Shirley Guthrie, Walter Brueggemann, Beverly Gaventa, George Strout, Wade Huey. The gifts they offered 25 years ago enable everything that I do professionally now. They also populate my cloud. Now, the point here is really not for me to tell you about my cloud, but to get you to think gratefully about yours. Who are the lives that have surrounded your life? Prayed for you, been with you in your broken places, left their imprint upon you? And who are the ones that you never had an opportunity, or perhaps never took an opportunity, to thank? I'd like to offer you an exercise for this week. Remember, we're attempting to practice gratitude, not just to entertain fleeting thoughts of it. So pick someone from your cloud and sit down with pen and paper and write them a note. If they're living, then send it to them. But if they're not living, or if you have no address for a person that you lost track of long ago, write the note anyway as an act of gratitude. Take time to put the words to the page. And if you're willing, and I hope some of you will be, add your note to the collage of gratitude that we're creating in the narthex. Or alternatively, think back as far and as broadly as you can and write down every name in your cloud. And keep adding names as they come to your awareness. How big does that cloud become? Think of lives that have touched yours or shaped yours lastingly or briefly, and mention them in your prayers of gratitude this week. Parents, tell your children about someone for whom you are grateful. Tell the story of how that person touched your life. Or each of us, pick a person after church and say, "Tell me about a person in your cloud, and let me tell you of a person in mine." Too often we fail to think consciously or speak intentionally of our cloud of witnesses. We might at times even think that we are self-made, or that we're alone. We're the opposite of alone. We are surrounded by witnesses and by simple heroes and by saints. Remember them with gratitude. And P.S. Write the note. Amen.